Where's the satisfying sound of one's impalement?
Won't fall for this old trick.
So, it's been an interesting week in gaming news, following the announcements that two of my all-time favourite games are being remade. These of course being The Last of Us and Resident Evil 4. And contrary to what seems to be the overwhelming popular opinion, I'm not particularly excited for either. Well, in the case of The Last of Us Remake, there does seem to be more of an even split between those who are excited and those who think it's completely pointless. With Resident Evil 4 Remake, however, I feel a bit more alone in my lack of excitement for it, and I find it pretty underwhelming from what little they've shown. This stems from the notion that this is a reimagined remake, which doesn't sit well with me. Honestly, if this had been a remaster remake, in the same vein as Shadow of the Colossus, Demon's Souls, and The Last of Us, where the core of the game remains mostly intact but with a brand new engine and rebuilt assets, I would be pretty damn excited for Resident Evil 4 Remake.
What? Same blood.
I feel like I should preface that I don't think this remake looks bad. I mean, it definitely looks incredible. However, this was also kind of a given, since we all know what the RE engine can do at this point, as we've seen in the recent games like Remake and Resident Evil Village. And I'm sure that it's likely going to be a completely competent and polished game. That's not what gives me pause. It just doesn't look or feel all that special to me.
Come on.
This is now the third Resident Evil remake in the space of about 4 years. When Resident Evil 2 was remade back in 2019, it really felt like an event. It was a big deal. It also felt like it made sense to remake Resident Evil 2, as that original game is very dated now with its fixed cameras and archaic controls. It benefited significantly from being remade on the foundations that Resident Evil 4 laid down for the series. Then they did the same thing with Resident Evil 3 a year later, to mixed results depending on who you ask.
Not your partner.
And now here we are, remaking the very game that these previous remakes were updated to be more like. There's also the fact that this is coming out directly after Resident Evil Village that I find really odd, because Village already felt like the reimagined version of Resident Evil 4, as it not only contained incredibly similar locations, but also very similar game design.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
The very idea of remaking Resident Evil 4 to be homogeneous with every other current Resident Evil game gives me pause, because it just seems so counter to why Resident Evil 4 has such a revered legacy in the first place, which to me is why the remake doesn't feel special. Resident Evil 4 wasn't just a landmark title in gaming that continues to shape and influence third-person shooters today. It was the game that completely reinvented the series. It tossed out the fixed cameras, the clunky shooting and slow pacing, and became a frantic action game that focused on freedom of movement in its arena-based combat with free aiming. Okay, yes, technically Resident Evil Dead Aim had done this first, it's just that Resident Evil 4 had the additional innovation of not being complete dog shit.
I was starting to get worried.
Don't you mean lonely?
It was such a dramatic shift for the series that people to this very day still argue about whether or not it ruined the series. But the point is that Resident Evil 4's legacy is built on how unique it was, and I fear that in the process of remaking it, all of that is just going to be stripped away.
No thanks, bro.
Another major point to consider is that Resident Evil 4 had a very specific tone to it, that, judging from what we've seen from the remake so far, doesn't look like will remain very much intact. Resident Evil 4 had a very deliberate B-movie camp to it. Leon had a very dry bravado to him as he made terrible quips like, "I was a bit tied up," and the ever so famous,
Your right hand comes off?
all played with such straight sincerity by the voice acting. It was a game where you were taunted constantly by a midget Napoleon who had a giant robot statue of himself. Do you think that's going to make it into the remake? I highly doubt it somehow.
Monsters. Guess after this there'll be one less to worry about.
This new Resident Evil 4 that's being showcased has a very dark colour palette to it, and the new Leon is coming across as incredibly broody, strongly hinting that they're going for a PTSD angle on his character, with that line that, "This time it can be different." The brief bits of gameplay shown seem to be hinting at a more reserved sense of pacing too, more akin to Remake. This is a stark contrast to the original GameCube trailer back in 2004 that proudly showcased the revamped combat and action focus. It just really makes me think that they're going to update the game in the most generic ways possible, which, again in my opinion, is just stripping it of the original's uniqueness. I feel I need to point out that in regards to the tone with RE2 and RE3 Remake, their original counterparts already had fairly serious tones to them that you could feel, limited only by some of the voice performances of the time, so nothing was really lost in translation when they were remade.
I don't ever remember being a part of your crappy script.
This then all feels in stark contrast to the recent Final Fantasy VII Remake that was also a complete reimagined update of a beloved classic game. The difference, however, is that Final Fantasy VII Remake retained a lot of the absurdity of the original game and actually in quite a few ways doubled down on it. Like, everyone assumed that the infamous Cloud cross-dressing sequence would be cut, but in fact it remained 100% intact and is actually even longer. The silliness of Cloud begrudgingly being the errand boy of manic pixie girls was heightened by the addition of Jesse now also thirsting for his Buster Sword and dragging him around on errands.
Oh, would you look at that? It's the end of the ride.
Ultimately, I should preface again that I don't think this remake necessarily looks bad. I just feel that with all of the drastic changes it appears to be making, that the game is facing a real uphill battle and contending with the immense legacy its original counterpart has, and I'm still not convinced that it needed to be remade in the first place. Everyone keeps saying it looks amazing, to which I respond, like Resident Evil 3 looked amazing.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Anyway, those are just my quick thoughts on Resident Evil 4 Remake. I know it doesn't seem to be the popular opinion on the remake, but this is just how I'm feeling currently. Maybe the game will be amazing, and I'll be pleasantly surprised. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe out there everyone, and I'll see you all in the next video.